Good afternoon. First of all, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your time and your attention over this very long 3 weeks. It's obvious you've been paying attention, and the questions were very thoughtful questions, and we appreciate that. So, what is the closing argument? Closing argument is an opportunity for us to rehash what you've heard, kind of condense it down. It's been a lot of information, a lot of witnesses, just a chance for us to summarize. And it's also a chance for us to give you our theory, what we think happened. So let's jump in. We talked in the beginning, I think in our opening conversation, about the two charges. We have a first-degree murder and we have a felony murder. 2 counts. That's what you're going to be deciding and looking at. So, again, going back to the boxes that I have to check. That's what we talked about in voir dire, right? Those boxes, those elements. So, you can see on the screen what the elements are. Defendant caused the death of Todd Stermer. Defendant intended to kill Todd Stermer. That the intent to kill was premeditated or thought out beforehand. And that the killing was deliberate. There's some definitions there, which you will have. The judge will give you all of this in writing, but that's really breaking it down to the simple form. Let's take a look at count 2. That's your first-degree felony murder. 3 boxes I need to check. First, that the defendant caused the death of Todd Stermer. Second, that the defendant had one of 3 states of mind. She intended to kill, or she intended to do great bodily harm to Todd Stermer, or she knowingly created a very high risk of death or great bodily harm, knowing that death or such harm would likely be the cause of her actions. And third, that when she did this, when she caused the death of Todd Stermer, that she was committing or attempting to commit the crime of arson. So those are your 2 counts. But within that, we need to take a look at arson, because that's part of that last element. So what are the boxes for arson? That the defendant burned a building, that at the time of the burning, that the building was a dwelling house, it was a residence. Third, that when the defendant burned the dwelling, she intended to burn the dwelling. And again, there's a little bit more description there, which you will have a copy back in the jury room. But that's broken down simply. Those are the boxes. So, let's talk about the evidence that you've heard now for 3 weeks. Because every witness is only one piece of this trial. You are the fact finders on whether these crimes were committed. And it's taking all of the evidence into account. So let's take a minute to look at the evidence. First of all, you heard from Sandy Stermer. She's the mother of Todd Stermer, victim who died in this case. Todd and Linda were not in good financial standing. You heard lots of testimony about that. The loans, being behind on bills, never able to pay the bills. Sandy talked about how Todd was in good shape. He was an athlete. There was discussion about how he was a coach. Todd built that house that burned on January 7th of 2007. And Sandy described her son as a perfectionist. Linda relayed little detail or facts about that fire to her in the stories that she ever gave Sandy. Twice, Linda said she went out the basement door, and once she said she exited out the front door. You next heard from Tony Evans. Tony Deputy Evans was the first deputy to arrive on scene at that residence on County Road 215. He observed the Stermer residence to be on fire. Flames were coming out the second floor and the smoke was going up. It was an overcast day. No issues traveling down that driveway. Hadn't started raining by the time he got there. Found Todd Stermer laying on the north side of the house. So as you're looking into the house, to the right-hand side. He was badly burned. His skin was slipping off his hands. Defendant was laying on top of him. He described it as face to face. And he had to physically remove the defendant from Todd Stermer's badly burned body. Todd had lacerations to his head and to his back, which you have then the autopsy, a copy of that, as well as pictures. His pants and his underwear were down to his ankles. Had his socks on. Deputy Evans used a plastic, he described it as a plastic molded sled to move his body to a safer location because of that fire, that fuel tank by the house. That was the fuel tank for the furnace. And when he was on the property, that's when he noted a van still running, smoke coming out of the tailpipe, parked in the rear of the residence. And that's when he saw the blood that you have the picture of, and he put a flag on. Tony took several photographs, of which we put several up for you, and they are admitted into evidence. He was able to follow a set of tracks. And he marked them. You can see you've got the left tire here, and you've got the right tire here. Same here, you've got the right tire and the left tire. He's able to follow that set of tracks through the area, right through where Todd was originally located. Those tracks led directly to the van that was running. You heard from Deputy Gruss. He was the second deputy to arrive at that Stermer residence. He arrived to the residence fully on fire. You can see by the picture what he saw. He attempted to render aid to Todd. He also observed Linda laying on Todd. He also stated he saw Linda's hands on Todd's face. He assisted in moving Todd and performing that aid on his badly burned body. He had an opportunity to speak to Linda Stermer, the defendant. Her statements at that time, where she was downstairs doing the laundry, heard Todd yelling and screaming, ran upstairs to the main level, and it was full of smoke. She was yelling for Todd. She tried to go up the stairway but could not get through the fire. So she ran out the front door. Later, she saw Todd in the yard. She got in the van and she drove around to try to get Todd help. You then heard from Dr. Musali. He testified that he was one of the neighbor to the Stermer residence. He saw the fire and he drove to the residence. I believe he said him and his sons were outside doing some chores. They got in a car, drove down to County Road 215 and drove up the driveway. He also discovered Todd in a badly burned state. Todd was laying near the house. He also said Linda was laying on Todd. And he helped move Todd in what he described as a small plastic John boat. And he also attempted to perform aid on Todd. You heard from Annette Crandall, a friend of the Stermers who responded to the scene as soon as she saw the fire. She sat with Linda at that scene, and she then said that she talked to Linda days after the fire, and Linda had told her that she picked Todd up and leaned him against the front bumper, and that's why there was blood on the van. You heard from Steve Leach, also a neighbor of the Stermers. Saw the fire, drove to the residence, lives right by it. He also described how badly burned Todd was. He also talked about how Linda had to forcibly be removed from Todd, not once, but on 2 separate occasions. He talked about how he attempted to render aid to Todd's badly burned body. He talked about how he helped move Todd away. And he stated, actually he was the Lawrence fire chief at the time, that he smelled fuel about Todd's person. You then heard from Mike Matheny, the direct neighbor to the Stermers. He testified that he was leaving his residence around 3:30. He went bowling at 4 o'clock on Sundays. He drove to the Stermer residence, and this is key. When he drove into the residence, he saw Linda in the van in the driveway. So we've put up a drawing here. You're coming in this way towards the house. He's coming towards the house, and he sees Linda in this area. And he says, as he's driving down the driveway, what does he see? He sees her back up the van and immediately drive to the north side and around to the back of the house. He stated he parked his own vehicle, went down behind where he saw the van going, and shortly after, as he's approaching, he sees Linda out of the van walking away from the van. He kept asking for Todd's location. Where's Todd? Where's he at? And Linda finally said, there he is. Todd was unclothed when he saw him. He ran to his vehicle to gather some clothing to cover Todd. He talked about just grabbing some of his items that he had, some hoodies, some coats, of which then you'll also see physically. You have the physical evidence of it, and it's talked about in lab reports. He helped move Todd away as well from that location by the fuel tank. You heard from Connie Calhoun in her emotional state. She also testified, she was living with Mike Matheny at the time, that they had bowling on Sunday at 4, and she left about 3:30 out of their residence. And when they were leaving, they saw the smoke when they left their house. She testified that she drove up that same driveway as a passenger in that vehicle with Mike Matheny, and she saw Linda in the van. She stated Linda's van was facing out towards the road. As they're driving down, Linda's driving out, they're facing each other. She then stated Linda's van then turned around and went to the back of the house. She got out of the vehicle, and the next time she went up, she saw Linda laying on Todd. You heard from Kim Thompson. Kim arrived at the scene of the fire. She's a friend and a neighbor to the Stermer family. She was just trying to go and help. She saw Linda for the first time that day on the hill on the north side of the house. Both the family dogs were outside. I think she told you about how they had to try to help catch the dogs a couple different times, or at least one of the dogs. Linda told her that she heard Todd yell, "The house is on fire." Then Linda opened the door, opened that basement door at the top of the stairs, and went outside, and she didn't know where Todd was. Another story that Linda told Kim was that there was a kerosene heater located near where Todd's chair was in the living room. In a third story, Linda claimed that Todd may have fallen asleep and dropped his roach. She told you that she took possession of both of those dogs and cared for them after the fire. You then heard from Ken Thompson, her husband. He remembers it being an unusually nice day for that time frame in January. He'd been out cutting wood across the street, spent most of the day there. He had gone past the Stermer residence 15 or 20 minutes before on his way home after cutting wood. Said he didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Got home, heard about the fire on the scanner, and he immediately got in his car and went back to the Stermer residence. Todd was on the north side of the house when he arrived, and he again described the injuries that he saw. Linda told him that she was downstairs doing laundry, looked up the stairwell and saw fire, too much fire to go upstairs, and she ran out the basement door. You heard Dr. Michael Markey, the forensic pathologist. He talked about how when he received the body, that Todd's body had the socks, the two socks, the underwear, and a shirt across the groin, and that's in the report and detailed in the report. He preserved those items and turned them over to law enforcement. He, as a doctor who does autopsies, had no opinion as to how the blunt force injuries occurred, other than Todd received blunt force trauma. And he described what he looked for and why he made that determination, and how he looked for particular patterns and didn't see them. And so all he could say was a blunt force trauma where the skin splits. Didn't know if the injuries happened before the fire, after the fire, or what caused them. He also couldn't tell the order of the injuries, just based on the body and looking at the body and examining the body. Couldn't tell what injury occurred first. He said that the burns to Todd would have caused severe pain. And that's common sense. When your skin is slipping off your body, that it would be painful. He also talked about the toxicology, which is on this bottom area here. Oops, sorry about that. He talked about the toxicology and about how in the blood they found caffeine, and it was negative for other substances that they screened for. And then in the urine, he found the hydrocodone, hydromorphone, and it was negative for anything else they screened for. And what's important to remember is he couldn't quantify the amounts. He could only tell you that they were above the amount that they screened for. We don't know how much of that drug was in the body. He also talked about 4 distinct lacerations in the head. He talked about 1 on each side, 1 on the top, and 1 in the back. And that's also in his report. He did say, upon questioning, and agreed that it would be consistent with injuries from being hit by a van. And he also said that the lacerations would be consistent with being hit by a blunt force object like a frying pan. You heard from Mr. Jim Shinsky. He gave the first detailed interview, or conducted the first detailed interview with Ms. Stermer about the fire. We talked a lot in voir dire about what do you do when you have inconsistencies? How do you get to the truth? What do? You start asking more questions. We talked about it in voir dire. Those were the answers you gave me. I ask more questions. It helps me get to the truth. One juror in voir dire, I asked a specific question about, well, what do you find when you start asking more questions? Their answer was, well, sometimes you get blame shifting. Sometimes you get blame shifting. Mr. Shinsky conducted detailed questions, started to dig into the inconsistencies. Linda discusses the morning of the fire, and she gives details about seeing that fire and events that lead up to that fire. And there is a transcript of the interview that you have, the entire transcript to review while you're deliberating. This is where she begins to point blame at Todd. I'm not going to bore you with the entire transcript, but I am going to give you a 2-minute recitation of the high points. Filled up the blazer, came home, he got up. She gave him receipts. He got angry and was screaming at her. Went downstairs and woke up boys, told them to go to the mall because her and Todd needed to talk. Went upstairs and made Todd breakfast. He ate and took meds, and they didn't discuss much more. He sat down and started watching hunting program in the living room. She did some laundry and some dishes, came upstairs and read an acne instruction booklet. Must have fallen asleep. When she got up, Todd asked for juice. She took him more medication. I told him I was going downstairs to do laundry. Todd was yelling at me, and then all of a sudden she heard him scream. She went running upstairs. There was fire from our bedroom to his recliner. He was on fire, his whole upper body, and there was fire and smoke. I just turned and ran out the door. She jumped in the van to go to Mike and Connie's. She backed up and saw Todd in the yard. She got out to try to help and get fire off of him. Later in the interview, he was screaming. We had been arguing quite a bit. We were arguing over me leaving to go to my sister's. Told the boys we were going to be talking about a lot of things. She didn't know how much arguing or yelling Todd was going to want to do. Just asked them if they would just go, and I would let Dad know that they were going. They didn't come up and talk to Todd because he was all angry. Todd was taking prescription meds, her sleeping pills, muscle relaxants, pain pills, a lot of things lately, and smoking pot too. Further, Todd took meds, began watching hunting. She went down and did laundry, folded laundry, and was putting Christmas ornaments in boxes, was puttering, went back up, read acne med pamphlet, dozed off, heard Todd in the basement. When she got up, he was back in the recliner, asked her for something to drink. Got him something to drink, did dishes. When she came up, made him a fire. Todd yelled at me once during the day and told me nobody else would ever have me. Now, when you came upstairs, you said you could hear him yelling, this is Shinsky, and then it turned to screaming. What was the yelling? She said, that's when he was yelling at me that nobody else would ever have me. When she came upstairs, around the corner from the stairway to the living room, there was a lot of fire between our bedroom door and his recliner. Todd was closer to the bedroom. There was just fire and a lot of smoke. There was no fire on the kitchen and dining room side. She could see Todd's legs. The chair was on fire. There was a little fire on the floor. A lot of fire over by the bedroom. She ran out the front door. She doesn't know where he came out. When he came out, he was completely covered in fire. When she came out, it was just black. She ran towards the side of the house. She saw a bunch of smoke. She ran to the van. She backed up and saw Todd, so she pulled forward real quick and jumped out to see if she could help him. He wouldn't lay down. He was trying to pull his pants and his socks off. She screamed at him to lay down. She got back in the van. She couldn't get the van back up because it's so muddy. Pulled over to try to help him. Realized she couldn't and she had to get some help. Jumped back in the van, but couldn't get back up. Usually we go down to the driveway because it's real sandy right in front of the house and then get going real fast and get back up. But then she saw Todd laying, so she jumped out of the vehicle and she ran to him. He wasn't on fire anymore. She saw the neighbors come up. Then when I was laying on him, I was trying to keep his mouth open and keep him breathing. They pulled me away from Todd. Later, recliner was all on fire. Big bunch of fire by bedroom door and between bedroom and fireplace. Bunch of fire by the recliner, not much fire in between. Ran out to van, parked in front. The keys were always in the vehicles, Todd does. She always brings hers in and puts in the kitchen. Todd was in the side yard. She pulled the van up real quick and jumped out. She was screaming at him to lay down. He was trying to get his pants off. She kept trying to get up and reach and grab him, his pants. He wouldn't stay still. Then he laid down. She jumped back in the van and tried to back up. She couldn't back up because it was too muddy. Couldn't see Todd when she backed up. Pulled down here because I was going to try and back up to get a running start, and she couldn't. Jumped out, ran to Todd. He was laying. She just laid on him, laid on Todd, trying to keep his airway open. She could tell he was breathing. She ran up almost to the fireplace, and fire came from our bedroom direction towards me, towards the fireplace. So it wasn't the fireplace. Her words. So it wasn't the fireplace. He could not have had fuel on him. I took him juice. I would have smelled it. Oh, since last winter was the last time we used kerosene. You think smoking is the cause of the fire? No, definitely not. We don't even own ashtrays. The kids were everything to him. This is where she begins to blame Todd. This interview greatly differs from the one that she gives Steve Willison 1 month later. Mr. Willison was the attorney hired by Farm Bureau Insurance. He conducted what's called an examination under oath of Linda Stermer. The interviews were conducted in February of 2007, 1 month after the fire, and then again in October. Many statements blame Todd for the trouble, more blame shifting. Stories are more elaborate and more dramatic. These statements also greatly differ. Let's look at the February interview. Finances were the wedge. Todd not running his business as well as he could. And she felt he should work more. He was not putting in enough effort, in debt continuously. What other issues were in the marriage, he asked. Horses. Had 49 at one time during the marriage. Said he was addicted to sleeping pills. Saw him take one the night before the fire. What was it? Ambien CR. Night before the fire, he came in the bedroom and tried to pry her legs apart and take off her pants, but she wouldn't let him. Said if he tried to make her, she'd call the police. Got home that day and began cooking and put on coffee for Todd. Told him that she used his debit card. Todd was mad, and she told him, "You knew I didn't have any money to get any of this stuff," when she got back from the gas station. "You wanted me to take care of these things, but I didn't have any money. So I used your debit card again." Spent a total of about $50 to $60 that weekend. That night, she went downstairs to the basement the night before the fire. The boys were watching TV. She laid on the couch with Trenton and fell asleep. They snuggled, because they're a snuggly family. She said she spent the night in the basement, the night before the fire. That's when Willison asks, "Well, what about him forcing himself on you the night before?" And she says, "That was later, after the kids had gone to bed, and then I went up to brush my teeth. He wanted to talk some more then. I told him no, and I went back down to the basement, and I slept on the couch." She tells Willison she told the boys to call before they came home because she needed to get the blazer for them, and she didn't know where she would be. She told the boys to call her before she came home. She had to pack. She went back upstairs and gave Todd breakfast. She made plenty of food, but didn't want the boys to eat there because of the way Todd was yelling at her. Told them to leave through the basement sliding doors. Willison says, "So he tries to force himself on you, and then you get up and get groceries for him and make him breakfast?" She says, "I thought I was making for everybody." Then she goes down to the basement. She packs up Christmas ornaments. She does the dishes. She says now for the first time she begins to pack a suitcase. She went upstairs to get things out of the bedroom, and that's when she sees Corey's booklet about acne medication. She reads the booklet and falls asleep. She gets up, comes out. Todd asks for juice. She gets him juice. Goes back downstairs. When I went back down, he was screaming at me again. He screamed that no one else would ever have me. And so what did she do? She slammed the door in the laundry room. She's taking the laundry out, and that's when she hears a scream, and she runs upstairs and sees the fire. She says, "I saw Todd take 2 Ambien last night." After she gets juice, Todd's ranting upstairs, and then it turned into a scream of pain. She looked in the living room. She sees Todd on fire. Fire was on both sides of him. It was on the floor over here to his chair. To make sure. His chair and the half wall were on fire, but not the whole half wall. His upper body was on fire. He was wearing sweatpants. I know he had socks on. I remember seeing his gray sweatpants. I just screamed and ran. "I've got to get out of here." She jumped in the van to drive to the neighbors. "What did you do when you got in the van and backed up?" She said, "I backed up straight. Where did you see Todd?" And she marks the X of where she sees Todd when she first gets in the van. She's in the van and marked an X of where she sees Todd. When she sees Todd at that X, he was on fire. She was in the van facing the front door. She did not see where Todd came out. She was going to turn around, but backed up. She didn't back up very far, and that's when she saw Todd. So she pulled up and stopped the van at number 3, which I believe Mr. Willison said she originally marked this number 3, crossed it off, and then wrote the one on top. So she pulled back up after she sees Todd, stops at number 3. I drove up there real fast. I jumped out at number 3 and screamed to just lay down. He was screaming and trying to pull his clothes off. I tried to get close to him. He was jumping and moving. He wouldn't lay down. I was afraid to touch him. So she jumped back in the van, and she couldn't get it to go backwards. So I slammed it into gear, and I went forward, and I almost ran through the fence. And that's what she's marked, ladies and gentlemen, as number 4. So the fence, you recall, is on the side of the property, and I believe you have a drawing showing how many feet that fence is from the house when they did the overhead. Now she almost hits the fence. I almost ran through the fence. I thought if I could get down, because every time we've ever had a hard time anywhere in this driveway, we just come down here because it was sandy and better traction. She could floor it and get back up and get to the neighbors. She got to number 5, which was here. Number 5, so she moved to 5, so she's at the fence, moves to number 5. And that's when she decided she needed to go behind the house. Then she hurried and drove to 6, which is behind the house, and saw Todd. He was not on fire. She ran to him. He didn't have his clothes on and was badly burned. He was like pink melt. She ran to him. When she was close, she saw Mike and Connie. She was screaming, and she laid on top of him. She was laying on him because he was naked, and I didn't want him to not be able to breathe. She said, I could feel his heart beating. I could tell he was breathing, but it was hard for him. So I put my mouth on his mouth a few times, and I just tried to give him little breaths. She saw Todd's skin was melted. She threw her purse in the van while she was talking to the boys as they were leaving. She talked to them on the way out because she had turned water on in the horse tank, told them to hang on a minute, not to take off without her purse, went out the basement door with them, put purse in the van because she thought she'd be leaving in the van. The fire was not connected to the fireplace. That's February. October is a small pack. October had already received $93,000 or $96,000. What was the issue you needed to get away from? His lack of working as much as I thought he should be working, getting behind in the bills. You described pretty heavy fighting Saturday night. She says, I don't recall that it was heavy fighting. I know we argued some. Willison says, didn't he try to rape you? She says, no, he didn't rape me. He wanted to have sex. She says she was in the laundry room. Todd was screaming, no one else would ever have me. Then he let out a terrible scream. She ran around the corner of the living room. Todd was on fire. Fire went from Todd to the bedroom. Got in the car, thought she was going to the neighbors to get help. She went through the yard by the barbed wire fence. She couldn't get going and get out of that spot, so she needed to pull down the hill to where there was better traction. She saw Todd before she got to the barbed wire, pulled away from the fence a little and got stuck. When she puts van in forward, she knows Todd's outside. She pulled forward down to the bottom by the house, by the slider. She was going to turn around and come back up the hill, going to try to barrel back up the hill, but sees Todd. First time she saw anyone other than Todd was at the bottom of the hill, either running to Todd or still in the van. She saw Mike and Connie at the top of the hill. She remembers backing up and seeing Todd outside. Got out of the van, screaming at him to lay down. He wouldn't lay down. He was trying to take his clothes off. He wouldn't listen. So then she gets back in the van, floored it too hard. She went too far off the driveway, stopped at the bottom and didn't turn around and came back up because she saw him laying on the ground. She ran to him. She saw the neighbors there. He didn't talk, but he was moving his mouth. He was still alive. He was having a hard time breathing. She remembered breathing into him a few times. They lifted her away. That was October. There's multiple inconsistencies, some consistencies. There's many different statements that blame Todd and point to this blame shifting. The stories are more elaborate, and the statements differ from the ones given to Shinsky. You then heard from David Hayhurst. He's from the Michigan State Police Crime Lab, and he conducted the examination of the van belonging to Todd Stermer. He noted that there were several red-brown stains on the front bumper and the underside of the van. He actually took samples, L1 through L6, of 6 different locations on that van. Said started from the front and went towards the back. All of the locations were then on the driver's side, and they were all on the front-facing parts of the vehicle as he went back. He took samples from all those stains, and he determined them, after testing, to be human blood. You then heard from Ann Hunt, who took those samples and tested a few of them. They're in the report of which one she tested, the locations that they came from, and they matched the DNA from the DNA card taken at the autopsy of Todd Stermer. You then heard from Troy Ernst. He tested the socks, the underwear, the sweatpants, the shirt across Todd's groin area that went into the body bag. And what did he find? Those tested positive for gasoline. He also tested all of the other clothing that you heard from testimony that was placed on Todd. That was Mr. McTheeney's. That was put into a separate bag. I believe Detective Mazieowski talked about a clean garbage bag. He tested those items, and those are in his report, and those tested negative for the presence of gasoline. And when I asked him about would it be more likely from one of those to then transfer to the other, he said that due to the nature of the particles on the sweatpants, the socks, the sweatpants, the socks, and the underwear, and the difference in the testing that he had done, I believe he described it as lighter and heavier particles, that it would be more likely the transference would have happened in the body bag from the sweatpants, socks, and underwear to the shirt, based on his testing of those particles. He was not able to quantify how much gas was on any of these items. He could only tell us that there was gas, the presence of gas. And he also told us that there was the presence of gas in that gas can, which he also tested. You heard testimony from Detective Rout. She was the detective called to the Stermer residence that evening of the fire. And she also took statements from Linda the night of the fire. Linda talked of an argument that occurred that morning of the fire. She detailed that the argument was over finances and her using a debit card. She had the boys leave to go to the mall so they wouldn't hear arguing, and said no further arguing occurred after the boys left the house. After the boys left, she went outside to turn on water for the horses. She went into the bedroom while Todd was watching TV to read acne pamphlet. Todd was watching TV and she was going to read the acne pamphlet and fall asleep. Woke up, Todd asked her for juice, of which she brought him. She then stated that Linda went downstairs to do the laundry, let out both the dogs and the cat. Not sure where the cat was or why she remembered a cat. Straightened up a bathroom, was in a laundry room and heard Todd scream that there was a fire, ran upstairs, saw a fire in the living room and a lot of smoke, but could not see Todd. And she left the residence, got in the van, heard a boom, and saw Todd on fire on the north side of the residence. Todd was on fire trying to shed his clothes. Then she stated she lost sight of Todd and drove around the north side of the residence to the west side near the basement to either get help or get Todd into the van. Todd was on fire. He wouldn't stop moving. She denied that she ever grabbed Todd. He was burned and gasping, and she was trying to keep his mouth open. Eventually, Connie, Mike, and Dr. Musali arrived, and she stated that there was a fire going in the fireplace. Detective Tom Maziowski testified. He was also another detective called on the scene the night of the fire. He arrived at scene, he contacted other officers to get details. He observed the person of Todd Stermer. He noticed the significant burns and the lacerations to his head. He also noted that Todd's person smelled of fuel. He collected the clothing taken off of Todd, and he attended the autopsy and also collected those items. Remember, the item that Sergeant Leroy collected are the sweatpants. Detective Maziowski collected the other evidence. Detective Maziowski was also present at the execution of the search warrant of the van. This was January 9th, 2 days later. He observed several possible blood stains on the driver's side of the van, consistently on the driver's side as you're going from front to back of the van. Saw no signs on the van, and you'll have the pictures of the van as well, that the van was ever stuck in the yard or that the van had become stuck. And when he looked at the tire ruts, the tire tracks, also didn't see any evidence of that. He did take a picture and saw the purse in the van that had Linda Stermer's wallet in it, her identification. He determined it to be her purse, and he found $202 in cash. Scott Leroy was the expert witness in the fire investigation. He was called in to determine the cause and the origin of fire at the Stermer residence. He collected these sweatpants that you see at Todd's ankles, as well as the socks and the underwear. He took photographs of some photographs of the Stermer residence that night, more later. And there was no examination of the house because it was still smoldering. It was the night of the fire, so he didn't go into the house due to safety concerns on January 7th. As he's removing the sweatpants, he's smelling accelerants. He went on January 8th to the Stermer residence, and that's when he took several photographs of the Stermer residence. I believe he went around the house, and you have those photos. He examined each room of the house to determine the area of origin for the fire. At the same time, he's also collected any available evidence that's relevant to determining cause or evidence of the crime as he's going around the home. And you can see the gas can that was found the next day. And it was also shown in pictures the night before. With all the data that Sergeant Leroy has, he uses it to determine the area of origin. Data of what he's found, data of what he sees, the pictures, the data of the statements made by Ms. Stermer. He uses a systematic approach to examine for evidence and determine the area of origin. He explained to you what he did, what his system was. He talked to you about burn patterns and mass loss and about how that was used in the determination. And what he determined that the area of origin was the living room. And later, this was confirmed with the additional statements of Ms. Stermer. This is where he marked the area of origin. He talked about mass loss. He talked about the roof that you still have in place. He talked about the walls still in place. And then he matched them with Ms. Stermer and what she saw. This is where Ms. Stermer saw the fire. You've got the recliner here and where she described seeing Todd Stermer when she came up the stairs. Matches his origin. He told you how he examined several different possibilities. Any causes that he felt were relevant, he used his common sense, formed his hypotheses. At that Stermer residence, he considered the furnace. He ruled it out based on the mass loss, based on the burn patterns that did not support the fire starting in the furnace area in the basement. Also, that furnace is not in the area of origin. It's not in that area. Ms. Stermer didn't describe it in the basement, said she was in the basement, that she came up, and it was in the living room. Considered a possible electric fire in the area of origin. He said there was no evidence that supported an electrical fire. Electrical fires typically start in the walls. The wall studs would have been completely burned away. And also, electrical fires take time to burn, time to develop. He also considered the fireplace as a cause of the fire. He looked at the burn pattern evidence, and it didn't support a chimney or a fireplace fire. He talked about how those timbers, right above the fireplace, and the header of raw wood above the fireplace. Those timbers around the fireplace would have completely burned if the fireplace or the chimney were the cause. When questioned and talked about the chimney chase and about how the materials would fall on top of the box, he talked about how all of that would burn. And he talked about how fire consumes everything in that little area of origin that it's working on. And then as it exhausts its fuel, it burns out and up. It would have burned everything around it before it moved. He also stated that there would have been a lot of smoke expected in a chimney fire, and that would have been probably noticed by able-bodied adults. Other possible causes were also considered and eliminated. He looked at the fuel oil lamps. They were small. They would have been a very small fire. They weren't consistent with gasoline or a description of the fire from Linda. And per Linda, the fire was not in the dining room or the kitchen, which is where those oil lamps were. He also considered a log rolling out. Talked about how there'd be a slow, smoldering fire, would not have spread quickly, and would have probably been noticed by Todd. He looked at if this was an intentionally set fire. He considered the fact that there's gasoline present in the area of origin with no explanation of why gasoline would be present there. Todd is found with gas on his sweatpants, socks, and underwear. He's on fire in the living room. Why is there gasoline there? It's a sudden fire, described as Linda. She talks about how he was yelling at her and then it immediately turned to screams. Not the description of a small, smoldering fire. She talks about the fire in between, extending from one side of the living room to the other. She talks about how it goes from the bedroom to the recliner, almost as if it's a trail of fire between the two. All of these, ladies and gentlemen, are consistent with an intentionally set fire. Common sense. Now let's look at what Cynthia Deloach said. Cynthia DeLoach remembers January 7 of 2007 because it's a small town. She worked that day. She thought her mom's house might be on fire. They drove out there. It was a big deal in their small community. She remembers distinctly Ms. Stermer came to the Marathon gas station approximately 9 a.m. that day. She explained on the receipt the time was off by an hour. Her boss had never adjusted for the time change. She stated Linda purchased gasoline with Todd Stermer's credit card at pump 3. You can see she described the account numbers match on the receipts, which would be here and here. This is the outdoor pump and indoor pumps. And you can see then the name Todd Stermer on pump 3. She specifically remembers the fuel hose going into the back hatch of Linda's Blazer. And I think she actually described it. She said, you know, when you have the glass half and you turn the latch and you lift it up. And she specifically remembers the hose going into the back, underneath that glass hatch. Like if she was filling up a gas can. She did say, I stopped watching after that. After I saw that, I just figured she was filling up a gas can, went about her business. Didn't see then what happened. Didn't see if maybe then she did put it in her gas can or in her car. She didn't know. But she does remember clearly the hose going into the back of the vehicle. You heard from Brad Stermer, Todd's brother. He helped Todd build on several pieces of the residence. He described Todd as a physically fit and a very capable person, very capable man. Todd loved his house. In the driveway of the house, he said it was a path when they were using it, in the beginning of it, when they started it, they used it as a path for construction. But after that, Todd graded it into a yard. So after construction was done, they stopped using it, and that's when he graded it and did the final grade. Todd and Linda, he also testified, were in poor financial condition at the time, and he stated that the horses were a financial strain on the marriage. Linda told him, I'm sorry, I can't read the small print, that on January 9th, Linda told him on January 9th, 2007, Linda described to him that she was downstairs doing laundry and heard Todd yell, Linda. She ran upstairs, she did not see Todd, and she ran out of the house. When he found inconsistencies and questioned her further, that's when he said, well, what about the smoke detectors? Didn't they go off? He knew that he had helped do all the hard wiring for those smoke detectors. And that's when she said, oh, we were having issues with them. Todd disconnected them. And then she didn't want to talk anymore. You heard from Mr. Chris Williams. You heard that he started an extramarital affair with Linda before the fire. About 6 months before the fire, they met at work. He talked about how she pursued him. Showed up at a parking lot one time when he was there shopping. He said he had sex with Linda about twice a week for 6 to 8 months, right in that time frame. Most encounters occurred at his house in Kalamazoo. He talked about how once they did go to see some museums or something in Grand Rapids, and they did some joyriding together, riding around in the car, but mostly it was just meeting up at his house. He said they did try to keep it quiet at work, and he knew she was married. That's why they tried to keep it quiet. He said that he saw a different side of Linda that Friday before the fire when Todd had sold a truck to purchase a van. That's when he saw a different side of her. He also testified from a question that Linda took him to the fire scene months and months later. after all the debris had been removed. We don't know why, but he testified she took him there. You heard from Kathy Ill. Met Linda in 2006. After the fire, she was at the Stermer residence. She noted several school pictures of the boys stacked in frames out in the shed. Linda also told her she needed to look for a cup in the dishwasher, and she wanted to look for some rings in the house. Ms. Ill got into Linda's vehicle later, and she noted a lot of jewelry in the center console area of the vehicle. You also heard from Kate Fox. They both had kids in Lawrence schools. They started work together at ChemLink. They became best friends. They actually carpooled to work together almost every day. Linda, in those car rides, began to confide to her with problems in her marriage. She started claiming abuse. Kate testified she never saw any signs of abuse. She did tell Kate about her affair with Chris Williams and that she wanted to be with Mr. Williams. The defendant wanted to be with Mr. Williams. She said he was the best lover she had ever had. And Linda told her about wanting a divorce from Todd. Kate drove Linda to Chris Williams' house on several occasions and actually told the police where he lived. Gave them the information of how to contact him. She testified that she knew Linda had 2 phones. One was kept at her house so Todd could not find it. Sometimes it was kept under the dash of the Blazer. She also talked a lot about how the defendant would talk to Chris Williams on the car rides home. She told Kate she thought of several ways to get rid of her husband. She told Kate that she considered shooting him, and she told Kate that she considered running him over with a car. She also testified that she called the police on Thanksgiving, just 6-8 weeks before the fire, because Linda had a gun and said, "Give me one good reason why I should not shoot Todd." She called the police because she feared for Todd. She said Todd was suspicious of Linda 2 to 3 weeks before the fire because he discovered a secret post office box. She asked Kate to go and clean it out. Clean out that post office box, get everything out of it. She also told Kate that Kate said Linda told her that she ran over Todd. She said, one story, it was because it was smoky and she couldn't see Todd and she accidentally hit him. And then she said the second version is that Todd ran out in front of him and then she struck him. She also said Linda called her a few days after the fire requesting a flashlight to locate a cup in the dishwasher of the burned home that contained tranquilizers that she was planning to give to Todd. This is when she decided to have Kathy Ill reach out to the police, and she wanted it to appear that the police were coming to her, not that she was going to them. She didn't want to walk into the police station. She didn't want to make a call. She didn't want any report saying Kate Fox called the police. She wanted it to look like the police came to her. You then heard the testimony of Dardita Gordon. Dardita is the unavailable witness. She has since passed away, since her sworn testimony. Her testimony stated that she was housed in a jail cell with Linda and that she befriended her. And Linda stated Todd was on medication. She testified to that. And she stated Linda told her she hit Todd with an object during an argument and started the fire. She didn't say what the object was. Even when pressed, she didn't say what the object was. She said it was just an object. And she stated that she started the fire with gasoline. You heard from Corey Pierce, the nephew raised as a son by Todd and Linda. You heard what happened the night before the fire. He was sleeping downstairs. You heard parents arguing about Linda cheating. He said Linda did not come downstairs that night. He did not hear his father working on the furnace, and his bedroom shared a wall with the furnace room. He says the day of the fire, he woke up to an argument between Todd and Linda about cheating. Linda came down and sat on the bed and said the boys needed to leave so that her and Todd could split up property for a divorce. Told him to take his brothers to Kalamazoo. And she told him she wanted Todd to think the boys were still home so that they would argue less. The day of the fire, Corey testified that he went upstairs, he saw Todd sitting in the living room, saw his arm, but he didn't see his face. He testified that Linda blocked one of his brothers from going to see Todd. He testified it was always common practice to give a hug and a kiss and say, "I love you," before leaving the house anytime. He specifically remembered seeing Linda's purse on the kitchen counter when he walked straight up the stairs. He said Linda told him that there were some statements about what had occurred in the fire, and those conversations usually happened in the vehicle with his brothers after the fire. He said one version, there was too much smoke when she tried to get up the stairs, and that she ran out the basement. Another version was that she ran upstairs and saw Todd on fire and ran to get help. When the brothers would question her differing events, like we talked about in voir dire, confronting with conflicting statements, that's when she would yell and become physically violent. He stated Linda coached him and his brothers on what to say prior to any interview or testimony, and said if they didn't listen, they didn't listen to her instructions, that they wouldn't receive any insurance payout to replace their things that they had lost in the fire. You heard from Trenton, the youngest. He was 12 at the time of the fire. He remembers an argument the night before. He stated Linda did not come down in the basement the night before the fire to watch TV or to cuddle with him. He said Linda did not sleep downstairs, and he did not hear Todd in the furnace room. The morning of the fire, he stated Corey woke him up, they got ready, they went up the stairs. He stated Linda blocked him from seeing Todd. It seemed like Todd was sleeping, but she shooed them out of the house. They left the residence in the black Blazer. He said that when Linda talked to them about what happened, there were differing stories. One version was she couldn't get upstairs and that she exited out the basement. One version was that if she could get upstairs and then she exited out the front door. He said Linda would attack him if he confronted her with her changing stories. He stated Linda gave him a bloody nose on one occasion when instructed his brother Trevor, the older brother, to silence him when he started questioning and pushing. Linda told him to say, "I don't remember," to certain questions during the insurance investigation. Lastly, you heard from Trevor. He said that the Stermer home was about 95% complete. They were missing some floor coverings, but he said about 95%. He said there were working smoke detectors, and he actually talked to you about how they would beep and he'd have to replace the batteries. He said Todd was meticulous about safety. He said the night before the fire, there was a very heated argument. It was the worst one he'd ever heard. He was asked to leave his brand new bedroom in that loft and go stay downstairs with his brothers because of the severity of the argument. Also had an open loft area, so probably was for the noise as well. She told him he talked about why they were arguing. He said it started with finances related to Linda's horses, and then it transitioned into Linda's infidelities. He also said Linda did not stay in the basement on the couch or cuddle with any of them that night. And Todd did not come downstairs that night. He said on January 7th of 2007, he woke up at 8 a.m. He tried to go upstairs, but Linda stopped him. Remember, he was the first one to wake up. He woke up early, and he wanted to get some breakfast. And she stopped him twice from going upstairs. He said another argument broke out that morning. And I think he actually said Linda brought him down a Pop-Tart at one time. Linda asked the boys to leave the house to go to Kalamazoo to a mall and movie. He didn't want to go. He wanted to wake up his dad and make an argument of why he wanted to stay. Tried to speak with Todd twice, just hoping maybe he could just stay home. And both times, he was blocked by Linda from going to talk to his father. He said after the fire, Linda's stories changed each time. What door she exited would change. She'd get angry and attack his brothers, or direct him to attack Trenton to stop the questioning of her stories. He said Linda sheltered them from any outside information. He only knew the facts as provided by Linda. He also coached them on what to say when questioned by the insurance or police. He also remembered a duck boat. He remembers Todd having a small plastic duck boat. He said it never had a gasoline engine. It had oars that they would use. And they would take it out in the back pond to go duck hunting on the property. Told a story about how Todd let him spray paint it camouflage with the green and black paint. He also said Linda's horses were an obsession. So let's break it down by the elements. Remember, you, as the jurors, have the opportunity to look at all the evidence. All the evidence surrounding this fire and making your determination on whether this was an arson fire set by Linda Stermer. No one witness is the entire case. You get to judge all of the evidence, and it's your decision. Start out with the second element of arson. We know at the time of the building, they were living there. It was a dwelling. So I've checked the box. Let's look at the evidence that would support the other two. What's the evidence that supports arson? The defendant bought gasoline. Actually, I'm going to stop there for a moment. I'm going to read to you the definition of circumstantial evidence, not in entirety. You'll have the entirety when you go back. Circumstantial evidence is evidence that normally or reasonably leads to other facts. Common sense. The defendant buys gasoline the morning of the fire. She's observed by Cynthia Deloach to have the hose in the rear of her hatch. The only reason would be to be filling a gas can. She's certainly not pumping it into the interior of the car. There's a small 1-gallon gas can found in front of the Stermer residence at the fire. There's no explicable reason for this can to be in this location. You saw a picture of all the gas cans neatly stacked in the shed. All of them, except for this 1 gallon. You heard the testimony about the huge tractor and how they wouldn't use a 1 gallon to fill up the tractor in the backyard. Gasoline is found on Todd's sweatpants, his underwear, and his socks. What leads to a logical progression? Then you can look at Linda's misdirection as evidence of an arson. In any detailed statement, she attempts to redirect towards the fuel oil furnace. She consistently mentions Todd bleeding the furnace the night before the fire. There's no evidence that supports this. As if she's redirecting you to think that that's why he would have fuel oil, which we know now is inconsistent. Fuel oil tests differently from gasoline. Fuel oil is chemically distinct from gasoline, and that's what you heard from the chemist. She tried to claim Todd accidentally started it with a dropped roach. There's no THC found in his system on that autopsy. It's not in his system, it's not in his blood, it's not in his urine. She describes it what we call a fire trail in the living room. She stated that it wasn't the fireplace. She detailed and described the path going from the recliner to the bedroom where Todd was. She described an excellent trail across her living room. It's like, what else? The suddenness of the fire. Todd went from yelling at her to immediately screaming in pain. You also heard witnesses talking about how within minutes of getting there, it was consumed. They were watching how it just started breaking through. I think Musali's, Matheny's, Thompson's, everybody was talking about how quickly it just was being consumed. This implies that it happened quickly from her statements. 1 minute it's not there, the next minute he's yelling in pain. Now that also we can look at the fact that she ran Todd over as evidence of an arson. He's the only witness to the crime other than her. And after Linda, sorry, your type is very small. After Linda realized he escapes, his survival would have left Todd as a possible witness. And she needed to silence that witness. You can also look at supporting arson, that she's laying on Todd, because that supports her intent to silence him. She laid on a man whose skin is sloughing off. They tried to carry him away and they couldn't because his skin was coming off and they had to put him in the boat to move him. She laid on a badly burned man who she described as pink melt and talked about how he was struggling to breathe. Why would you lay on a person with that severe injury and who's struggling to breathe? She had to forcibly be removed from him as they're trying to render aid 2 times. This can all be considered as part of the arson. You can also consider that she let the dogs out moments before the fire erupted. She didn't want her dogs to be killed in the fire. You can also consider that there were framed pictures of her children that were moved to a shed on the property. Precious keepsakes were spared, things that can't be replaced. The boys, pictures, the dogs. She didn't have to worry about the horses, they were outside. You as jurors can take the totality of all the evidence presented, all of the evidence presented, supporting that Linda intentionally set that fire. The element, the defendant burned the building. We believe we've given you the evidence. We believe that we've given you everything you need to make that common sense approach. What makes sense and leads to the conclusion? The conclusion is that the defendant burned that building, it was a dwelling, and that she intended to burn it. So let's go to count one. Let's go to evidence of murder. Actually, and it applies to count one and count two. What then gives the support for the details of the murder? The details of the day of the fire are very inconsistent. You can look at her statements. She tells multiple stories about how she exited the residence. She tells multiple stories about what she saw. She tells multiple stories about why there's marital discourse, but denies that she's having an affair. She only gives the details she thinks won't incriminate her. You can also look at the reason for driving the van into the yard, which makes no common sense. She drives to an area worse off than that inclined driveway. The inclined driveway, that fire trucks are coming down, emergency vehicles are coming down. You saw pictures of it the next day. She drives to an area worse off than the driveway. She drives to an area that's more difficult traction, down a hill. She claims to be trying to get help, yet she drives into the backyard when Mike and Connie are driving down to her. She's in the driveway when they see her. Tracks in the yard show the van going from where Todd was laying in his pool of blood to the backyard. Claims to not know she hit Todd, yet the blood is all on the driver's side. There's a reason we talked about that in voir dire. You guys gave descriptions of what you heard when you hit a squirrel, a raccoon. This is all on the driver's side, and there's 7 points of impact with Todd's blood. She claims she didn't know she hit Todd, yet blood's all over that driver's side. And once she claimed, maybe in an attempt to try to cover her tracks, to one person, that she got out and leaned Todd against the bumper of the van, and that's why blood was present. Which is interesting, because he would have had to have been bloody before she hit him and then leaned him up against the bumper in order for that blood to get there. What else can we look at for evidence that it was a murder? You can look at the evidence that Dardita Gordon gave you in her testimony. Linda admitted to striking him with an object during an altercation. She admitted to starting the fire with gasoline. She knew Todd was on a medication. That's an odd fact for somebody at the jail to know without directly being told by the defendant. Todd suffered multiple lacerations that can easily be explained as a result of being struck by a blunt object. There's one completely in the back of the head. There's one on the top of the head. There's two on the sides. One could easily be explained by a blunt object. Perhaps even the frying pan that you see in the rubble that was not above, there was no kitchen above, and it was found in the laundry room. She admitted to wanting Todd gone. You can consider that evidence. She concocted ways to kill Todd. She thought about running him over and said that to Kate Fox. She thought about shooting him with a gun. That's why Kate called the police. She'd become violent with the boys. You can consider that. When confronted with inconsistencies, she became physically violent with the boys when they pressed on her inconsistencies. She coached the boys on what to say. Why would she have to coach them on what to say? She told him what to say at interviews, told him what to say to the police. She'd only do this. She's trying to hide the truth. Why didn't she just tell him, tell the truth? Tell what you know. Why'd she coach him on what they could say? So let's look at evidence of premeditation, because that's count one. You gotta find evidence of premeditation. First thing, purchasing gasoline. You can consider for all these different things. You can consider for the arson, you can also consider it as evidence of premeditation. She gets up in the morning, she buys gasoline the morning of the fire. Cindy sees her putting the hose in the rear of the hatch. Only logical conclusion, she's filling a gas can. A 1 gallon gas can's found at the front yard at the time of the fire. Tells Kate Fox she wants to kill Todd. She's thinking about it. It's premeditation, it's thinking about it. She contemplated differing ways of completing the act. She attempts to frame Todd. You can consider that. She uses Todd's credit card to purchase gas. She claims she didn't have any money, which I read to you, which is why she used the debit card, but yet she has $202 in her wallet in cash. Why is she using Todd's credit card? She wanted to look like Todd was the one that bought the gas? She consistently tried to paint Todd in a terrible light, despite having no evidence to support her accusations. Blame shifting. You can consider that as evidence of premeditation. You can also consider that she sent the boys away from home. She's thinking about it. Why did she send them all away? She told them to call first before coming home. She didn't let them see their dad. She physically blocked them from seeing their dad. Keys were waiting for him in the Blazer. What else? Her purse. Her purse and her money were found in the van. Corey specifically remembers that purse on the counter when he came up the stairs, said he was looking right at it. Linda was preparing to be gone after that fire started. That's the evidence the morning before the fire starts. But you can also consider additional premeditation. She sees Todd escape the burning residence. He's screaming, pulling off his clothes, hollering in the yard. She can't let him survive. He's going to tell what happened. So what does she do? She gets in the van. She makes a nice little arc pattern to the north side, into the backyard, and runs him over. She strikes him on the driver's side, directly in her line of sight. And she tells you multiple times, I saw him in the yard, then I got in the van. She saw him before she got in the van. And what did she do? She drove immediately and drove over him as Mike and Connie are coming up behind. That's the second instance of premeditation. You got the premeditation in the morning about the fire. Now you got the premeditation of trying to run him over when he escapes. But now let's talk about the third time and her attempt to try to silence him when she doesn't kill him after she runs him over. He's breathing. His heart is still beating. He's struggling to breathe. His mouth is moving. And what does she do? She jumps on him, face to face, on his burned body. She places herself on his body, covers his face with her hands, by one witness's description. She has to be forcibly removed by people who are trying to help him and render aid. She knew he was struggling. She knew he was hurting. And she laid on his body. Why? She's thinking about, what if he talks? What if he lives? Judge is going to give you an instruction. We don't need to prove motive, but it's something you can consider. It's not an element, not a box, but it's certainly something you can think about. What could be the motive? Well, you got finances, cash strapped, behind on bills. Todd's lazy, doesn't work enough, doesn't make enough money for her. Divorce isn't going to benefit her. At the time, she has multiple horses. Horses are very expensive. Without money, you can't care for them. Without land, you can't care for them. Divorce would have likely have ended up in a place she wouldn't have had a place to keep her horses. Her obsession. Let's talk about Chris. She has been engaged in a 6-month relationship with a man she wants to be with. Best lover she's ever had. Wants to be with him. It's a long-term affair. Ends up going at least 8 months before she breaks it off with him after the fire. Let's talk about common sense. I told you, don't check your common sense at the front door when you come in this courtroom. Let's talk about why Linda's story makes no sense. She's involved in a terrible argument with a man she claims is abusive. Yet, she goes to the store and she makes him breakfast, builds him a fire because he says, hey, it'd be a good day for a fire. Yet gets him juice when he asks. Yet she putters about the house. Yet she puts Christmas decorations away. She reads an acne pamphlet and takes a nap. Yet sends her children away from the home and her main source of transportation on the day she's supposed to be moving to her sister's. They're getting ready for such a huge fight. They're splitting up all their assets, send the boys away because this is going to be so horrible. And she's making breakfast and putting Christmas ornaments away and taking a nap. Why didn't she just pack and leave? It doesn't make sense. Why did she drive the van in the manner that she did? She claims she drove the van to get help. Yet help is coming down the driveway, the very help she said she's getting ready to go get. She's going to get Mike and Connie to help. They're coming down the driveway. Why? Why is she driving to the north side of the house when help, the very help she wants, is coming down the driveway? She claims to not have ever seen Todd in the side yard. Yet she strikes him on the driver's side, going at what we've heard may be slow speeds. She lines up and hits him on the driver's side. She says it was so smoky she couldn't see him in the yard. Look at the smoke, ladies and gentlemen. There's no smoke in the side yard. Certainly not obstructing your view in the side yard to see. You can see the trees in the background. Common sense says if you got outside, you saw your loved one escape that house on fire. Common sense says, oh, I probably better go and try to help this person because by the time I drive down to the neighbors, how many feet away, this guy's going to be burned up. Common sense, okay, let's say you panic and you don't think that way. Common sense would be like, oh my goodness, my husband, the father of my children is on fire. You'd keep your eyes on him to see what's happening. She says, I see him when he comes out. He's on fire. But then she claims, then she didn't know where he went. Doesn't make any sense. Why she drove onto the backyard? She claims it was to get better traction. Testimony established this was not an improved driveway. You saw all the pictures. You can have them back in the jury room with you. Traction in this area is way worse. Going down a hill. Think about your grade, your basement, even if you have an 8-foot ceiling, you're going down 8 feet. Claimed she did this to get to the neighbors, yet the neighbors are already there. So let's talk about what does make sense. What leads from one conclusion to another. The morning of the fire, Ms. Stermer gets up. She's contemplating the fire. She goes, she purchases gasoline, and she removes the things most precious to her from the home. Probably, makes sense, she was arguing about her affair with Chris Williams, with Todd. She strikes Todd with an object sometime during that altercation, just like she told Dardita that she struck him during an altercation. And now you've got a possible laceration from blunt force trauma on the head. Dr. Markey testified that you can knock somebody unconscious without having any brain trauma, that just having that indentation, you could knock somebody unconscious. Also makes sense that she had planned to drug Todd with a cup in the dishwasher, but she changed course. Maybe that argument got out of hand. Maybe she just changed her mind and decided this was an easier way. She douses Todd with that gasoline that she bought that morning. So gets it on his underwear, socks, sweatpants, recliner. And he's not on fire yet. She runs downstairs. We don't know. She's changing clothes. She's letting the dogs out. Did she ever run downstairs? We don't know. If she does, we don't know why. Maybe she's changing clothes. She doesn't expect the fire to erupt as quickly as it did, because she doesn't know it's the vapors that were testified to that can ignite. You have an incapacitated man with gasoline on him. You run downstairs to grab something, do whatever you're doing, those vapors ignite. It would explain why it's sudden. It would explain why it catches her off guard. Who knows? Maybe she planned on going up and knocking a candle over. Maybe she planned on throwing in a match. It just happened too quick. Those vapors ignited. You've got that open source of flame, that fireplace, and it just erupted before she's ready. She flees the house. Here's the top of the stairs, as she describes it, and as Corey describes it. She gets to the top of the stairs, there's the counter, right where her purse is, right where Corey described it. She grabs her purse in an attempt to escape. Maybe she thinks she can just get in the van and drive away, he'll burn up. She'll have an alibi, she's not at the house. So she's gonna drive away. Problem is, Todd escapes. She sees Todd. He's in the side yard, ripping off his clothes, screaming. At that point, she's thinking, he's alive. He's got to be silenced. What does make sense? She gets in that van. She's trying to flee. She sees Mike and Connie coming down. Now she really panics. She can't leave this burning man in the north side of the yard, hoping he's just going to die, and she could drive away. Now she's been caught. She's been caught by Mike and Connie. What's she going to do? Is she going to take the chance that he's getting that fire out and going to tell Mike and Connie what happened? She panics. She pulls off the driveway into the rear yard. She lines Todd up with the driver's side and she runs him over. And I want you to think about relating that to all the stories she told Willison and Shinsky. Those are so elaborate. Driving, getting out, trying to help. He won't lay down. I get back in the van. I then drive, then I get stuck. Didn't happen. No time. Connie and Mike saw her right in the driveway. There was no time for any of her elaborate story to occur. There was no time. What does make sense? Todd gets out of the house on fire. She runs him over. She runs over to him. Oh my gosh, he's still alive. He's breathing. His mouth is moving. Now what do I do? I'll tell you what she did. She made another attempt to silence him. She jumps on a man who is struggling to breathe, placing her hands over his mouth. In yet her third attempt to make sure he can't talk. and tell what happens. Using your common sense, that makes sense. The facts as told by Ms. Stermer make no sense. Then you often look at the cover-up. She tells multiple half-truths. We talked about half-truths in voir dire. We talked about what you do when you have a half-truth. She gives half-truths about the events of the day. She gives multiple versions of the events. She changes details surrounding the cause of the argument. She can't even keep straight what door she goes out of. She becomes physically violent or emotional when she's confronted with inconsistencies. She coaches her sons on what to say. More questions lead to differing stories. This is because, ladies and gentlemen, she can't tell the truth of what happened on January 7th of 2007. Because the truth makes her guilty of premeditating that murder, of trying to kill him in an arson, and ultimately his death. She wanted to make sure Todd was dead that day, and she wanted to make sure she did everything possible to make sure he did not survive. He didn't survive the house, he didn't survive the van, and he didn't survive even laying on that ground. She did whatever she could. Ladies and gentlemen, common sense. These boxes are checked. Linda Stermer caused the death of Todd Stermer. She intended to kill Todd Stermer. Her intent to kill was premeditated. You have all kinds of evidence of that. And that killing was deliberate, meaning she thought about it, she weighed the pros and cons, and she made multiple actions, confirming that that was her intent. She had time to think about it and change her mind. She didn't. She caused the death of Todd Stermer. She had one of those three states of mind. She either intended to kill him, intended to do great bodily harm, this is count 2, or she knowingly created a very high risk of death, knowing that that death would likely be the result of her actions, and that when she did that act, when she caused the death of Todd Stermer, she was committing or attempting to commit arson. Those are your elements. Ladies and gentlemen, common sense tells you those boxes are checked. You have all of the evidence. You have everything for that logical conclusion. I'm asking you, ladies and gentlemen, to go back into that jury room, go through that evidence in more detail that I've given you. I've given you a snippet over the 3 weeks that you've been here. I tried to sum it up for you. You have more. You can review anything you want back in that jury room. Look at that evidence, piece it to those boxes, and I'm asking you to find Linda Stermer guilty of both count 1, premeditated murder, and count 2, felony murder during the commission of the arson. I appreciate all your time and attention. Thank you.